Hello and welcome back to the Masonic Roundtable, a weekly program where Masons from around the world get together to talk about Masonic news and opinions in a friendly and social manner. The standard disclaimer applies. The thoughts and opinions expressed here are solely the opinions of the participants and do not represent any Grand Lodge statements or positions. Make sure you keep your conversations open for the public and on the level. To interact with us, send questions and comments to our Twitter page at Mason Roundtable, on the Facebook event page for episode 203, The Origins of Freemasonry, or in the YouTube chat running alongside this video. As for me, my name's John Ruart, past master of the Patriot Lodge, number 1957 in Fairfax, Virginia. I'll be one of your hosts tonight, followed up by the very handsome Robert Johnson.
Oh, you're such a liar. What's going on, guys? Robert Johnson, past master, Waukegan Lodge, number 78, Waukegan, Illinois. And for the first time, past District Deputy Grand Master.
Woo! PDDGM. P. Diddy.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. And the much machismo, Juan Sepulveda.
Good evening, brothers. Jason, I noticed that when John said the most handsome, you unmuted. You were ready.
I'll keep thinking one day it'll be me.
I think we're equally in the handsomeness. And welcome again to another program. Thank you for joining us. My name is Juan Sepulveda from Orange Blossom Lodge, number 80 in sunny Kissimmee, Florida, and the host of the Winding Stairs Freemasonry Podcast Archive.
All right. Thank you, Juan. And last but not least for tonight, the very muy guapo Jason Richards.
Good evening, everybody. Jason Richards here, past master of Vacation Lodge number 16 in Clifton, Virginia, member of the Colonial Lodge number 1821 in Washington, D.C.
All right. And here we go into another fine episode. First up from Masonic News. I found this just moments ago. Last week, we talked about the Enough is Enough article in such that the United Grand Lodge of England took out a full-page ad in The Guardian to say enough is enough with bashing the Freemasons. We're not the spooky evil guys. We give a lot to charity. And so interestingly enough, someone wrote a counter article on a fact check on channel4.com asking, do the Freemasons' claims really stack up? Think of it as PolitiFact for The Guardian. And so sure enough, if you make a claim, there's enough research out there to go find out if what you said is true. And I think it's an interesting take that basically, they break down each of the points, specifically in the charity aspect, where they say the advert by the United Grand Lodge of England started by claiming they value service to the community, saying last year we raised over £33 million for good causes. After we did our fact check, we found that about half of that go right back to Masonic charities. So that's an interesting data point they bring up, that good causes could be left open to interpretation, and they certainly did. And I think there's no hiding the fact that we also consider charity to our own Masons and their family as part of the Masonic charity that we provide. But certainly when someone's trying to do a fact check and there's a big line down the middle of half of what you say you're giving away, you're giving back to those of like kind. Also, another breakdown where they showed the Grand Lodge funding distributed via the Masonic Fund. Actually, only about a quarter of it goes to non-Masonic entities. So I found that interesting from a data perspective, that someone did a fact check, put some pie charts together. Go check it out on the YouTube video, or check the link on the show notes. And what do you think about this? Do you think it's fair reporting to have someone do a fact check on the Enough is Enough campaign? What say you guys?
Why not? If we're going to make claims, we got to stand behind it. There's probably something that could be said, maybe for any of those guys who made those quotes initially, that Yeah, they do raise that stuff. And Masonic charities aren't always like internal. Like the Grand Lodge of Illinois has Masonic charities, which specifically benefit not Masons. Like we have a program that's the Student Assistance Program, which trains teachers to look for at-risk kids. Like we pay for that training. We pay for those teachers to hire substitutes for the days. Like we take care of that. So those in those instances, like that's an example of a Masonic charity that we created that goes directly back into the community. So it's got to get a little bit more granular for me than just put a line down a graph and make some claim that no, only half of it. But just my take. I'm an optimist, I guess, that way.
Yeah, I completely agree with RJ. It's just, I can see from the paranoid specter that is, the connotation of Freemasonry in Europe. I could see how folks would want to gravitate toward the fact that it's like, well, half the money just goes back into the Masons. But again, Masonic, organized charities don't all help just Masons. It's there are external charities that are funded and organized by Masonic groups that help a wide range of people outside of the fraternity. So it's one of those things where it might be nuanced to us, but at the same time, given the political climate against Freemasonry, especially in Europe, I can see how that would be a really important distinction for a newspaper to gravitate toward.
Yeah, I think if percentages of donations is the focus, it is important that they don't do it in a vacuum and they present it in a way that can shed light in the fact that many organizations that help charities and help for different situations, the percentages they fluctuate. They can be as high as 89 for a company like United Way or the Red Cross or something like that. But you have other in the other opposite end of the spectrum where what ends up going to charity is very little because they have really high operating costs. So if they're intending to be very fair and not just trying to create like an expose style report, they should show, well, in average, big organizations that focus on charities give between this percentage and that percentage. And if they had done that, it would not be causing the stir that this might be at the moment. It's like, okay, even if some of those Masonic charities are still pointing outwards, it's still, in contrast or in comparison, it's a high percentage.
Yeah, I agree. Another interesting thing they add is that because of the discrimination and stigmatization of its members, they've reached out to the Equality and Human Rights Commission, who also wrote the Equality Act and Human Rights Act, trying to see where they can apply for being a quote-unquote protected class. Although it's not a religion, right? Everyone has to believe in a supreme being in order to be a Freemason. And so it's interesting to see what legal basis there is for the Freemasons' arguments.
I was going to say, are there any other fraternal organizations or groups or clubs that are on that protected class list?
Yeah, I haven't. I'm not familiar with the UK version of kind of our, Non-Discrimination Act kind of things that we have in the States here. But we even know there are loopholes in that as well. So, or I wouldn't say loopholes. There are classes of citizens that are ignored or not as legally protected. So, Robert's bringing up.
For instance, like we have Charity Navigator, right? So you can look for just type in your state and then the word Masonic, and you'll see like a ton of the items. Now, some of these, for us, it doesn't. They're not rated yet, so you'd have to rate it, I guess. But some of the information is here, and you can kind of discern, what's what. But But like, for instance, I just typed in Illinois Masonic and look at I have Illinois Masonic Children's Home, which is not even a thing anymore. We have the Masonic Charities Fund, Masonic Home, Masonic Medical Center, Foundation for Prevention of Drug and Alcohol Abuse. So like, you know, those ones are Freemasonry. There are some in Royal Arch Masons, Illinois. That's another charitable fund. So you can check them all out. Most of them are not or rated or whatever.
That brings up a good point too. Any of these 501c3s, because of their IRS filings, you should be able to see how the donations are broken down and into what sections and how much assets they have. So it's fun fact to Google on a rainy day. Let's see. Next up in Masonic news, if you did not get access to the UGRA Academy from the Northern Masonic jurisdiction, fret no more. Well, fret a little, because you're not coming out empty-handed. They did roll out part of a new advertising campaign that they're giving away for free as a way to have downloadable graphics and images that you can brand in a Masonic fashion. So you have
a trademarked, copyrighted Masonic fashion.
Yeah, so there's some brand guidelines that we'll talk about in a little bit here. But they're giving away a little bit of formats and templates for Facebook covers, Twitter covers, poster size things of the Not Just a Man, a Mason branding campaign. So you can go to, I believe it's notjustamason.com and download all of these for free. And again, as Jason alluded to, they want you to stay within some brand guidelines. Don't go crazy with the square and compasses and those kind of things. Use common fonts and formatting. But if you didn't know where to start to kind of either advertise something for your Grand Lodge or your lodge in particular, here's a great free resource that the Northern Masonic jurisdiction is giving away. Note, this is not a Scottish Rite thing, even though it is sponsored by the Northern Masonic jurisdiction, Scottish Rite. It is a mostly Blue Lodge campaign.
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about this was I actually had demitted from the Northern jurisdiction, and then I watched Dave Glatley come on, and I watched him talk about his dedication to the ritual, and he talked about stuff, and he said, we're changing some things, we're taking it in a new direction. And the troll in me wanted to be like, yeah, but where is it, man? Put your money where your mouth is, buddy. And like, they shut me up pretty good, I think. They brought out a product, like whether you think it's good or bad or whatever, it's something. It's usable now, and it is in a form, and it's a tool that we use on a day-to-day basis. Like, I'm not sure any Grand Lodge out there would have thought to make like, okay, yeah, let's just put the imaging out there. But they also put a Facebook like cover photo size, and they did all that stuff, which was great. And actually, I reached out right away and said, hey, can you do something for Grand Lodge, Illinois? And they were like, yep. And they had me a file in like 2 days that was all set up with all our information on it. And I just kind of turned that over to Grand Lodge. I was like, hey, do with this what you want, but check this out. And so it was pretty cool. Like, one of my friends was like, that's not exactly like, the best kind of advertising. I don't know about that. But like, hey, what are you doing?
Free is free.
Exactly. Don't complain. If it's free, it's good. So I'm still waiting on my invite to the Hoot Grade Academy. I'm waiting on that one still. So hopefully I can get into that.
Yeah,
Scott got in.
Robert, they're full.
Okay. What?
Said, sorry, Robert, they're full.
Oh, I know they're full. Treating it like real college or something.
Yeah, you wouldn't pass the admissions test anyway.
Yeah,
Next
probably.
up on Masonic news, we have a new book that's been published, coming straight from Brother Chris Hodap's blog. We have a new book titled 41 Million Men, a new must-have book about millennials and Freemasonry. That's right, published from McCoy Publishing and Masonic Supply Company. We have a new book coming out, I think, this past Saturday, just in time for the Conference Grandmasters, about the importance of the millennial generation to Freemasonry. Now, most of us would probably fall into that category, or at least be right on the line between millennials and Gen X's. Apparently, it's a short read. It's an easy read. It has a couple essays from Mike Holleran and amongst others. And so, sight unseen, I don't know what to expect nor what its conclusions are. But I find it interesting, as Chris Hodat brings up, that this is yet another generational lens of which we look through to find some solutions for Masonry. What do you think, guys?
Well, Mike Halloran is not a millennial, but I don't know about the other guys. So I'm curious to find
Samuel
out.
Friedman is.
Okay, so we've got
He's actually written an entire book on similar topics.
So that's some validity there. That's cool. I don't know. I'm not a fan of pigeonholing people into generational, like, I guess, categories or whatever anyway. I think it's more of a socioeconomic thing, but that's just me.
So for me, I think I don't know how much good this book is going to do, because we've talked about generational differences, and we've talked about what Grand Lodges need to do in order to begin appealing to a different class of Masons, and I don't think all the books in the world will change the minds of some Grand Lodge leadership and spur them to actually making the changes that are necessary in order to attract a younger generation of Masons into the fraternity. That's just me being super pessimistic.
So you be more of a glass half empty kind of guy.
I'd be more of the glass is trying to kill me kind of guy.
So I think Reddit, as usual, summed it up perfectly when I came across this image today of, okay, you want to talk about generations in Masonry? Fight to the death. And for the audio only version, it's a screenshot of Mortal Kombat #1, the original, with both books, Reclaiming the Soul of Freemasonry versus 41 Million Men. Fight. Millennials versus Boomers. Who's going to save Freemasonry? It's meme worthy. It really is.
It's meme worthy. Like, I think maybe I don't know, 8 years ago, when I was like I'm always very opinionated, right? But 8 years ago, 8 years ago, opinionated is largely just me mouthing off and whatever. Now I look more at entire pictures. I consider myself, if I've got an opinion, it's because I've actually read some things on it and I'd like to read opposing views. And I just know too many guys that are boomers that are great guys and they do some pretty kick-ass stuff. So I don't know, but and I see just as many millennials who are doing that. I think there's crap in all of us. So I don't know that it's going to be 41 million millennials are not going to save this craft, because 3/4 of us don't have a job. So
we can't afford the dues.
Yeah, we can't afford the dues. Okay,
the dues are too dang high.
Boomers are on a fixed income. They can't afford the dues. We can't afford the dues because we don't have a job. We're pigeonholed.
Student loan debt, baby.
We got all the student loan debt. Yeah.
Funny. All right, I think we've chatted enough about some cool things this week. Let's segue into this.
Wait. Quick question.
What's your question?
For the book on how the millennials are going to save the craft, is that available in any other format outside of like hard copy?
Well, let me see. I mean, the book cover actually has a cell phone right there in the middle, and yet I've been unable to find it anywhere digitally. And that's not a surprise because McCoy Publishing.
It's McCoy, right?
Nothing digitally. Unlike the Soul of Freemasonry, which was available for Kindle. I was able to grab it up that day. So hint, hint, McCoy, if you're talking about millennials, you might want to provide it in a format where we can read it and search it and use it.
That's just like, you know, when a movie comes out and then it comes out at the wrong time and instantly bombs. It's not necessarily the movie's fault.
Yep.
It's this book. Like, they,
Like now introducing, The Last Jedi on VHS. What? Okay.
It's micro disc.
Yes.
Micro disc.
Okay, let's get into this week's topic. I know we need to transition. Tonight's topic is on the origins of Freemasonry. So where did Freemasonry come from? Nobody knows. Thanks. Good night. It's been a great show. We hope you enjoyed it. But what we're going to do tonight is try to deconstruct parts of the many theories of the history of Freemasonry. Tonight specifically, we'll be talking about the chivalric origin school, which includes the Knight Templar and the Knights of Malta theories. We will also talk about the dinner club theory and how the egalitarian elite of London have morphed this society. Jason's going to talk a little bit about the transition from operative to speculative. And then I'll kind of close things out with an idea that I have heard about the out of nothing school. So without further ado, Juan will start us off talking about the Knights Templar theory of the origin of Freemasonry. Take it away.
Okay, so here is the theory. One, I'll have to open up by saying that one of the first books that I read, and I think that I read it a little prematurely. So let that be a cautionary tale for those brothers who are listening who just join the fraternity. Give yourself a little bit of time and allow yourself to go through more of the degrees before you delve into it. And it is Born in Blood, The Lost Secrets of Freemasonry. This is by John J. Robinson. And it's a very interesting read because he goes, the way he breaks the book down, he actually starts by talking about the Knights Templar exclusively and gives a little recount of who they were, what they did, the way that they protected, the way that they how can I say this? The way that they protected what they were responsible for. Then they go on to talk about Freemasons and give a very broad overview about what Freemasonry is. And then towards the end of the book, it starts weaving a story of how the two are similar and how the two, according to the theory, are one. So basically, early in the 12th century, you have the poor knights. I always mess that up. Poor knights of, what is it? St. John, the Temple, something or another. I can't think of it right now. We know it just as a Knights Templar, but it's this order is developed to protect the people of Israel. You have this migration, not migration, but the help me out. La caminata. Every time the
way
going to and fro.
Right.
Just like they do in Mecca. What is that called?
Pilgrimage.
The pilgrimage. Thank you so much. So they're helping in that progress, protecting these people, going from one point to the other and back. Now, the way in which they do it is by going with them. They also have some instruments of finance that are pioneered in the time to protect the treasure of these pilgrims. And these men are warriors, but they're monks. And you have this devotion to deity, and you have the zeal to protect people. And the theory goes that in 1314, when Jacques de Molay is killed, that the order goes underground and protects itself by going into like secret lodges throughout the world, more predominantly Scotland. And there they employ themselves as builders. So they infiltrate the guilds and basically give some sort of a structure to the builder guilds and
This is
remain
where Rosalind Chapel comes in, right?
exactly. Um, and that's where you have what we now have physical evidence for, because all of this it's just a beautiful story. It's something that, I asked some brothers online earlier about, what their opinion was about this particular theory. Like, are we really directly linked to the Knights Templar? And almost every answer is like, I want to believe so. And wanting to believe so is not credible enough evidence for the origin of anything. So I described it as creative license from the founders of our order, and it's something that, of course, is very romantic. It's very, it's an ideal, but it is, in my eyes, it's just that.
But Juan, we have a Knights Templar degree. Can there be any more conclusive evidence than
Absolutely, it's sealed.
prove it?
Prove me wrong.
So I think one of the interesting parts about John J. Robinson's chivalric school and Templar origins theory is the idea that, yes, fleeing persecution, the Knights Templar went underground, but they continued to transmit their knowledge and their secrets. And part of the secrets of Freemasonry, of course, as we know them today, are the modes of recognition, the secret signs, grips, handshakes, words, etc. And the idea that the Knights Templar figured these out and formed these special modes of recognition as a way of protection when they were underground fleeing persecution. That does resonate a lot with me. I think it's a really cool theory. I don't think there's any historical backing or historical evidence whatsoever that actually occurred, but it's still a nice story.
But we really want to believe it.
It's romanticized. I mean, it's a fantastic story, and when you look at things a little bit, I guess logically, so this all happens, with Jacques du Molay, but the issue is that there were Templars all over Europe, and the idea is that they didn't round all of them up. I mean, it's impossible. So I've even heard some theories. A good friend of mine, Frank, is all in on this, right? That he believes pirates, like specifically Blackbeard's flag, is Masonic. Edward Teach's flag is Masonic, and that he could be some remnant of a Templar, and what they were running in this ship were artifacts from the Holy Land. Now, again, I'm not saying that's correct. I'm saying it is a great story, and there's a lot of intrigue there. And I mean, if there wasn't, we wouldn't have the Scott Walters. Okay, we wouldn't have the John J. Robinsons. So
you bring up a good point, though, Robert. That is part of the kind of expanded chivalric origin story, where the Knights Templar didn't actually go underground to Scotland. They went underground and became sailors in the Caribbean. And Masonry actually evolved out of pirating. Pretty interesting story.
All right. Well, that's a good segue to Scotland, where I know, Jason, you've done a lot of research on the origins of Scottish Freemasonry, especially we did an episode, I believe it was 151.
151, yeah.
A year ago on Freemasonry in Scotland previous to 1717, which will help us with this origin story. Jason, take it away.
So, if you all are going to hear me speak at your lodge or near you this year, I actually do about a 45-minute to hour-long presentation on the transition theory of origins of Masonry and the fact that Scotland and Scottish Masonry is the one place in the world where you can actually concretely trace through primary source documentation and historical records the 800-year or so transition between operative stonemasonry into the speculative fraternity we know today. I am not going to bore everybody with all of those details right now. However, I will say, in a nutshell, the main point is the fact that the Industrial Revolution and the Grand Lodge system killed operative masonry.
Wow.
Or saved it, depending on how you look at it. So you had a great deal of operative stonemasons operating in Scotland due to the prevalence of the Catholic Church and the fact that the Catholic Church at the turn of the 12th century owned over half the land in Scotland. So there was an influx of, during the 1100s, there was an influx of stonemasons guilds from Italy, from Germany, and other places into Scotland, because that's where the work was, because Scotland was mostly Catholic and they had a lot of money to build these great cathedrals. And that's where operative masonry really got started in Scotland. But as you go through history, you have the Protestant Reformation in 1517 that hit Scotland in about 1560. There's a turn away from these grandiose buildings and this architecture. Stonemasons are getting in less of a demand. Means there's less money flowing into the guilds. Then you start to see, based on the logbooks and the lodge registers that we still have existing records of, you start to see little bits here and there of the fraternity opening up to gentlemen, to lawyers, to members of the nobility. And it's very spotty for a couple hundred years until you get to about the early 1700s, when the Grand Lodge starts to get formed. In 1736, the Grand Lodge of Scotland is formed up in Edinburgh, Scotland. And at that point, at the turn of the 1700s, you have the Industrial Revolution, which essentially modularized the art of building. So you're looking at more and more steel and iron construction, whereas stonemasonry really started to decline in an operative sense around the turn of the century. But at the same time, you had the Grand Lodge of Scotland coming in and passing out charters left and right to lodges and creating new lodges across the entire country, to the point where numbers are a little fuzzy, but I believe within the first 10 years of the existence of the Grand Lodge of Scotland, the Grand Lodge had chartered something like upwards of 100 to 160 new lodges. And at the time, there were only 70 to 80 extant operative or hybrid operative speculative lodges in Scotland. So, of course, the Grand Lodge of Scotland was chartering these lodges to non-operatives, because at that point, operative masonry was in sharp decline. And about the turn of the 19th century is when the Industrial Revolution really put the final nail in the coffin of operative stonemasonry, and it really transitioned into the fully speculative fraternity that we know today. And that is, in a nutshell, the transition of theory of origins, as traced through primary source documentation, lodge records, and charters of in Scottish history.
Very interesting. I'm going to save my questions for you after I get to mine. But next up.
Well, you're wrong.
Yeah. Well, I believe you're wrong.
You're going to be wrong.
You'll be wrong after you hear my talk. Robert, though, has an interesting theory of basically the dinner club theory. What's
Robert's also wrong.
Yeah, I may be wrong. I think the way I look at mine is somewhat of a romanticized idea. There's a little bit of everything in this that we have to look at, essentially types of people. And when I look at the types of people, so in this way, you have a lot of people who will detract from the fact of they'll say Masonic ritual has nothing to do with Egypt. It has nothing to do with this. It has nothing to do with that. But in fact, I think it does. And I don't think we originated in Egypt or anything. But what I will tell you is that from the beginning of time, man kind of questions his existence. And when he does that, he becomes this thinker. And the thinker becomes, you gives way to religions and orthodoxy. And then after a while, the thinkers continue to think, but it's illegal, right? Like you need a place to think and to talk in private. And on the other side of the spectrum is like the development of a worker's craft. You have things that need to be created, so you have to have skills to develop those things, and then you need to essentially protect the skills needed to protect the work. So, like the first unions, and I think there's probably some overlap here. And I think thinkers, maybe somewhere around the mid 1600s, 1700. I mean, we do have the records that go back in Scotland quite a ways. So there might even be some overlap as early as that goes. I mean, we're talking about anytime there's a persecution of ideas being projected, which goes back, 1,000 years, you have these kind of problems. So what I think's happened is you essentially have thinkers who infiltrated our craft, right? So I think in the beginning, we were likely just the stonemasons guild. I don't necessarily know for a fact that in the beginning, there was any kind of degree. I know Jason's got some information that I'd have to look at, but I think
in the beginning there were two.
See, but I don't know. Like
Actually, sorry. In the beginning, there's documented historical evidence of one.
So within that, right? Like to take that, and what we've got is these thinkers who typically, you have learned individuals who have money. That's why they're learned. They can read. It's attached to the church many times, and I think what happens is kind of like these aristocratic dinner clubs maybe started to join these lodges. And I think they start to influence them in a way to kind of pull some threads. And they use the secretive aspect of the meeting to be able to freely talk about the ideas that they can't talk about on the outside. So I feel like there's this elitist infiltration. You have an element of literacy, so they could organize the craft into what it became later. I believe they wrote the degree rituals and developed a structure pulling from source material that does trace back to Greece and Egypt, pulling those initiatory rites and then developing them for the 18th century, 17th century man. They had money, so this keeps the craft afloat. As Jason alluded to, it stopped the craft or killed it or whatever, the Industrial Revolution, or it saved it. So I think that money saved the craft. Without it, I don't think we would have it today. And they influence. So this is where we have our political powers. It's in fashion or in vogue. We have the super influence of kind of those aristocratic original Masons. And the guild system brought in stuff too. So they had these ideas of harmony, equity, standards of conduct, governing systems and bylaws. And then when they blend together, what I think can be discerned is, how our craft is today is the rich aristocrats of the day gave us some philosophical degree systems, which come from Greece and Egypt. And the guild workers gave us frameworks, laws, and most importantly, in appealing to the thinkers of the day, secrecy. So that's kind of my fantasy amalgamated dinner club Mason. It's somewhat tied into transitional because it does, but I feel like it's more of a thing, two separate things. One infiltrated the other and changed the dynamic forever. So like today, sometimes I might say, why can't we practice Masonry the way it's supposed to be? Well, if you want to practice Masonry the way original Masonry would be, you should probably get to work, probably live in a tent, work with some stones, and just agree not to steal work from your brothers or marry up your coworkers' daughters or whatever. That's probably original Masonry. Like the innovation is literally, for me, this influx of elitist gentlemen who came in and wrote degree rituals. I mean, that in itself is the innovation. And when I say I want to practice, when people say they want to practice traditional observance or whatever, it's not. It's traditional to what? And that's kind of the question.
That's always relative. Tradition is always relative and a moving target.
Right.
So, and Robert, I do think that history is on the side of your argument, because we do have documented evidence, especially in Scotland, of gentlemen like William Shaw, the Master of Works, and Sir Robert Moray, who were these big thinkers who came into the operative guilds and revolutionized the teachings, or at least the thoughts on Masonry. William Shaw, of course, really set out to standardize the guild's administration and ritual to some degree. And then Sir Robert Moray introduced the art of interpretive symbolism into Masonic guilds according to historical tradition.
And that's where you're 100% wrong, because it comes from a completely different angle of everything you just said to be true.
So
Okay,
before you talk about that, John, do we want to pay homage to the ancient origins theory real quick?
Do we have anyone who's got the research on that?
I do.
You do? You did 2 for 1, man.
Yeah.
What is this? Go ahead.
Because I talk about all the origin theories in my Scottish Masonry presentation, to include the one that you're asserting is actually the real one. So there's of course the ancient mysteries school of the origin of Freemasonry, and this theory revolves around the Pillars of Enoch, which in antediluvian Masonry, I do a presentation on that too. In antediluvian Masonry, or life before the flood, Enoch was said to have constructed 2 pillars on which he wrote, he inscribed the secrets of the arts and sciences, to include Masonry. And after the flood, the descendants of Noah and the descendants of Lamech, to include the one who was the grandson of Lamech, who I believe was supposed to have been Hermes Trismegistus, found these pillars and was able to transcribe the secrets on them specifically relating to Masonry and translate those secrets into ancient Egypt, where they thrived and became a part of mystical ancient Egyptian culture, transmitted through the ages to the Chaldeans, Babylonians, Greeks, Russians, and on down to the Age of Enlightenment, where they were adopted into where they were adopted into this new fraternal society that was growing out of the Age of the Enlightenment.
Yeah, and that's really key. So, like when you talked about Hermes Trismegistus, it's like you have several cultural archetypes that lay over that one individual, and it leads into like the Egyptian origin of biblical characters, which is kind of a twist that we're starting to see a lot of within some of this kind of ancient history or ancient origin stuff that we can study. I wrote a piece on Midnight Freemasons on Monday. It was called Freemasonry Connecting It All, in which I lay out the origin and I talk about Earth before the impact. It was Tiamat. and I talk about satyrs, and I talk about giants and Nephilim, and Zachariah Sitchin's aliens that came to change the human DNA. I lay it all out for you guys. It's 100% serious.
That's when in doubt, it's always aliens, right?
Well, you know where the story of Atlantis comes from. It could have come from that meteor impact that flooded part of antediluvian Earth.
I'm just saying, the younger Dryas.
Good. Okay, so now we're going to get to the real story, which is...
Wait, what? John, you're breaking up.
Oh, no,
can't
you're
hear you.
not going to cut me off that early.
Actually, it's time for social media.
Oh, gosh, look at the time. You know, it's really fascinating because as I was researching the ex nihilo theory, which is the out of nothing theory, or the fact that Freemasonry came out of nothing. There's nothing there. A bunch of guys got together and created basically a shorter version of what RJ said and a little bit of the transition theory that Jason said. Really, a lot of the modern research on this comes from a guy named John Hamill, who wrote a book called The Craft, A History of English Freemasonry in 1986. So not too long ago, but he's really starting to spark this research. And if you look at any videos of like Brent Morris trying to talk about where did Masonry come from, we don't know. You know, we had all these operative guys, and then boom, that went to this tunnel, and then out comes speculative Masonry. We don't know what happened in the tunnel. John Hamill, John Hamill takes the approach of, well, right, let's look at the data, and because there is none, we cannot draw historically accurate conclusions based off of that. And so he goes to elaborate on to say certain things like, yeah, in Scotland, there is a wealth of evidence for the existence of operative lodges organized on a geographical basis and backed up by all the statute laws, such as those we talked about. From the early 1600s, there are many documented examples of the introduction of non-operatives into Scottish operative lodges. There is not, however, any evidence that these non-operative members in any way altered the nature of their workings of Scottish operative lodges until the very late in the 17th century, by which time accepted Masonry, or we call it speculative Masonry, was well established in England. So all the evidence suggests that accepted Masonry emerged in England, specifically London, and spread there to Scotland. So all of the historical evidence is true that, you know, these operative lodges were accepting speculative men, but it was because speculation inserted itself instead of evolved. And so he goes on to say, you know, the Scottish operative lodges began in the 17th century to admit, let me make sure I got my notes here. So those speculative lodges eventually combined to form the Grand Lodge of Scotland in 1736. And as we talked about in episode...
They weren't purely speculative lodges, but okay.
But as we talked about in episode 151, that the Grand Lodge of Scotland was formed in 1736 and basically was a speculative innovation, and so it let all of the other operative lodges do their own thing. It really didn't get into the knickers of all these other operative lodges, and that makes a lot more sense now.
Yes, but it was comprised of primarily operative lodges, and we know that for a fact. The notable exception being Mother Kill Winning Lodge, which, you know, threw a hissy fit, took her toys, and went home.
Right, and so
That's
I think
why they got number 0.
Bam.
Well, they came back
Memorial.
because they like touting themselves as the oldest extant lodge in the world.
Mm-hmm. So I think, you know, some critics of Hamill will say that, yeah, we do know that some of our founding fathers in Masonry appeared out of the public houses of inner London rather than out of the operative guild halls. And so people will say that he is quite wrong about other parts of England, Scotland, and France. But, you know, if you really look at the dates of these things, Grand Lodge of Scotland was 1736 after the 1717 date, even the 1721 date. France was 1728. they really don't have evidence of this evolution. And so really, if you're trying to look through the lens, even if you're looking at what you were talking about earlier, Robert Murray was made a fellowcraft in 20th of May 1641. Elias Ashmole 11 March 1682. Some of these first known documented Freemasons, guess what? Were members of the Royal Society of the aristocrat society of this, learned men who really didn't get their hands dirty at all. So if these are the earliest known speculative Freemasons, and they are like upper class, where's the transition, right? And we don't have the evidence of this transition.
So we don't have the evidence because King James VI in Scotland, James I in England, in 1475 banned associations and trade guilds in England only. So he was king simultaneously in Scotland and England. Oh, however, in England, for whatever reason, he banned these associations and trade guilds. So Freemasonry as a trade guild in England disappeared off the map at the turn of the 16th century. So at that point, the historical evidence ceased to exist until the late 1600s, when speculative Freemasonry began to emerge on the scene in England. So the fact of the matter is we just don't have any sort of historical evidence on a transition in England because of the banning of the trades guilds.
I think there's a research paper, and if I could find it, I want to say it was on MasonicWorld.com, and we read it on the show on WCY a while ago, and but essentially it tackled the argument that there was no transition, that they were two separate entities coexistent at the same time, and one just died off, which was kind of interesting. But again, I don't know, like when we're here and now talking about the facts that we do have, and that's where I usually put my money, right? So like if I had to put my money on a bet tonight, I put all my money on Jason. But that's because we have facts, we have written documentation, and we have hopefully smart enough minds to discern truth from pull the thread a little bit and connect some dots. But that is, of course, looking through the lens of a 21st century human.
Yeah, but you call it facts, but facts are subjective. Like if it wasn't the Knights Templar, how come I have this puppy in my hand?
Oh, yeah.
Huh?
Nick probably has such a broner right now.
So, look at the resistance that we see every day when we attempt to exert improvements into the Masonic experience with technology, with this show. Thank you, Juan. It's a beautiful sword, man. I think the same thing was true for the transition to speculative Masonry. It in a lot of ways, it ended up being a hostile takeover that the Grand Lodge of Scotland and the Grand Lodge of England facilitated. Because eventually, not everybody was okay with the transition, and eventually the speculatives won out. So we're seeing the same kind of things today with the war on information technology and virtual lodges and all that sort of stuff.
The thing is that you can't stop evolution. Even this conversation kind of reminded me of, I was recently listening to Richard Dawkins talking about evolution through natural selection, and he posed the question, okay, who was the first man? And you can't look back and find the first man. Every single organism is the same species as its parent, and its kids are also the same species. So the transition from single cell organism to complex organism to fish to amphibian to mammal, like that. There's never one. It never started here. It was just a transition that nobody can see. So that's why even with all the resistance we find for innovation in masonry, it's just a matter of time before Freemasonry is just simply unrecognizable.
So that's a great way to wrap up the episode. Let's start going around for final thoughts and shameless plugs. And we will start with Robert Johnson. His final thoughts.
Final thoughts. I still like my theory the best, but the facts, I have a real hard time. I'm always somebody who tries to reconcile things. And I know there is kind of this idea that we should let go of the human's need to reconcile things, because we should just be okay with the way things are and ride the wave. However, my analytical side likes to look at dates and confirm things and trace things. And I think it's just so important, especially in history. And we can look kind of deeper, when we have these documents, and we can look at them and we can put things together in our head and imagine, and maybe we have the intellect, maybe we have the foresight to kind of connect the dots, maybe fill in the gaps in between, right? But we have to have also this responsibility not to go a little too crazy with our imaginations, which is probably where my theory comes from. I would look at Jason's theory and go, yep, that's written down in like 5 places. That's not going to be disputed. Like, I can't argue that, because if I do, I'm going to look like a fool. Like, that's the way I feel. And I look at John's sentiment in regards to this elitist movement, and because I see those early speculative Masons joining who are Royal Society members, like, that's a fact, but now I'm drawing a conclusion. And so my conclusion is that there's an infiltration that happens. Like, I don't know for sure. Of course, some of that kind of plays out. I want to say there's a Scottish Rite Northern Jurisdiction degree that deals with a Rosicrucian council. And I don't want to give it away for anybody out there, but it's kind of an interesting story. It's a little bit of an infiltration story in a way. In any case, learned a lot, as always. I just want to tell everybody out there, thank you so much for watching this show. And I'm really having a lot of fun watching. I think, Juan was the first one who really dove in on the YouTube comments on the side. And that was something that we always wanted to do during the show, was to have like a running commentary and be able to chat with folks during the show. And the Google Hangouts toolbar thing never worked, but the YouTube does. So it's been really cool to chit chat with some guys, especially Nick out there. I don't know if you caught my comment, but I think it's The Secret History of the World by Robert Black, which I think is a pseudonym, but if you can find it, it's good. The audiobook's even better. But that's it. So if you like Masonic podcasts, check out Whence Came You, Sunday nights, 9:30. And talk to you guys all real soon. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Juan Sepulveda with that big sword you're swinging.
I'm blushing. It is a fun exercise to just go and look at the different factions and try to attempt to get a little bit closer to a resolution of what the origin of Freemasonry is. And you'll come across people that are very passionate about one of these stories we've discussed tonight, and they'll have a very, very passionate response if you try to dismantle their theory. And what I would say is, in your search for light. Try to find out more details and see where the evidence points you. But the most important thing is to try to find out what all of these things are trying to tell us. Like, what can we derive from it? What practical lessons can we get from, if you were to think about the Knights Templar origin story, and you see how they, even though they had a benevolent disposition, a benevolent mission, they became vulnerable because of their finances, and someone with more powers that was able to squash them and completely disband them. So even there is a practical lesson of not allowing not losing control of your finances, and being a good steward of the assets to which you've been entrusted. And just like that, you can derive lessons from all of these origin stories. And whether we never find out conclusively where the order began, we can always derive lessons that we can try to put into practice into our lives. So I enjoyed this episode. Thank you for those of you who did more research than I did. We'll pick up the slack on another episode, but it was fun nonetheless. So thank you again, as always, for joining us and for the participation. A lot of brothers, Joe Martinez, Nicholas McGee. We have CWH. We'll not learn this brother's name later. We have William and Jonathan Farmer. A lot of brothers out there sharing their thoughts and opinions about this topic. So we love the participation. The more people we have there, the easier we can squash any trolls that try to poke their heads through and bring this harmony. So thank you all for your support. And last little bit of information, we have a very cool project that some of you have been a part of. It's called Applied Freemasonry. The window is open to sign up for the next 6 weeks. We delve into some of the practical applications of Masonry, the practical real-life use of the 24-inch gauge, the common gavel, but it goes even deeper than that, how to bring balance to your life, how to be a good communicator. It's definitely a good program. So if you have any questions, I'm at your service. Go to thewindingstairs.com and click on Masonic Education on the top for more details. Thank you, brothers.
All right. Thank you, Juan. Heading over to Jason Richards.
All right, everybody, great episode. I love delving into history, specifically, when we're dealing with the limits of historical knowledge as set forth by John Tosh, who's a British historian. The fact that we are faced when writing about history with too much information, and at the same time, not enough information. There are gaps in our information, and there are records that are inherently lost to time. So it's always an adventure writing about history, because you're a detective and you're trying to figure out what these disparate pieces of information together. It's like putting together a giant jigsaw puzzle where you don't have all the pieces, and you don't know which piece, you don't know if the pieces even go to the same puzzle or not. Two great books that I want to talk about real quick. One is The Origins of Freemasonry, Scotland's Century by David Stevenson. This is an incredible book that is the best documentation of pre-1730s Masonry in Scotland that I've ever found. And then another great book by Robert L.D. Cooper called Cracking the Freemasons Code. This is another fantastic book talking about early operative to speculative transition. One thing I did want to talk about in reference to John's theory from Hamel is that Hamel's theory stands on a key difference of assumptions than the transition theory. The transition theory stands on the assumption that the operative and speculative fraternities were the same organization. And Hamel's theory is that the operative and speculative organizations were actually two disparate pieces, and one supplanted the other. So my question is, and I'll end with this, my question is, if operative and speculative Masonry were two separate organizations, is the Freemasonry of today, as we know it, with an emphasis on charitable giving and fraternalism that emerged out of the antebellum era, the same Freemasonry as the Freemasonry at the turn of the 1800s and 1900s, when we were focused specifically on the mystery schools? Or has another organization supplanted the original speculative fraternity? That's all I got.
All right. So that brings me to Jason's rhetorical question, in which I want to come right out and say, yeah, I don't believe that the ex nihilo theory is the one to end them all. I think Jason put some interesting data points to go off and explore further. Plus, he's kind of done a lot more research than I have, so I'm gonna tip my hat to him and say, good job on the research.
I'm just debating because I'm a jerk.
Well, it's you're certainly doing a good job at it, so I'll give you that from what it is. But I think one thing that's really interesting, and I'm looking for the quote, but I can't find it. But basically, John Hamill was also quoted as saying something along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing it horribly, that I think that basically that there's only one universal accepted truth of Freemasonry, and that it has evolved over time. And I think that's really good. There's the old adage, the only constant is change. The only thing that is from time immemorial in Freemasonry is that it's always changing. And so, all or none of these theories could be right. And I think that's what makes it fascinating. I like to relate this to the concept of Bitcoin, of course, right? Because it's the 2018. For those who don't know, Bitcoin was started as an academic white paper of a digital currency that's decentralized. And it was authored in this white paper by a guy by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto. And no one knows who Satoshi Nakamoto is, nor will he ever reveal himself to the public. And so it's created this mythos in literally, the 2000s of an existence that's mythical, of an existence that we really can't trace its origin to, but yet it's the system that exists and evolves to date based off of a couple ideas that Satoshi alone was not alone in. He was not the first one to come up with digital coinage, but he was the one to kind of codify some of these new thinking and apply it into an actual system that we use today. Sound familiar? Right. I think there's a direct analog to this kind of Bitcoin paradigm that we're in today in 2018, compared to where we were with this operative to speculative conversion of the origins of this system that has really lasted 300 plus years. And here we are in 2018 also talking about it. So hopefully you take that as inspiration to say that just because we don't know where it came from doesn't mean it doesn't have value, and that we certainly are trying to live up to all the standards that it extols today. That's it, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and keep searching for more light. Have a good night.